So I would like to introduce our next speaker, all right? Professor Rose Luckin is a professor of learner-centered design at UCL Knowledge Lab. And Rose's research involves the design and evaluation of educational technology using theories from the learning sciences and techniques from artificial intelligence. She has a particular interest in how artificial intelligence techniques can now be used to enable more effective, continuous, formative assessment processes and tools. Her 2018 book, Machine Learning and Human Intelligence, The Future of Education for the 21st Century, describes how we can best benefit from using artificial intelligence to support teaching and learning, and how the prevalence of artificial intelligence in our future means that we need to revise what and how we teach and learn. So she has also published numerous academic articles, authored 2 monographs, and edited 2 paper collections. Rose is also the director of Educate, a London hub for international technology startups, researchers, and educators to work together on the development of evidence-informed educational technology. She's a specialist advisor to the UK House of Commons Education Select Committee for the inquiry into the 4th Industrial Revolution. She's also the co-founder of the Institute for Ethical Artificial Intelligence in Education, president-elect of the International Society for Artificial Intelligence in Education, a member of the UK Office for Students' Horizon Scanning Panel, advisor to the AI and Robotics Panel for the Topol review into the future of the NHS workforce, a member of the European Artificial Intelligence Alliance, and many more. And she's also the holder of the international chair at KU Leuven. So Rose was named, with all the accolades that she has, Rose was named as one of the 20 most influential people in education on the Selden list of 2017. So ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and pleasure to welcome Professor Rose Luckin to give her keynote.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a lovely welcome. And it's so nice to follow Siddhartha. I'm a big fan of Siddhartha's work. I think he's quite inspirational. And had I known what he was going to say in his talk, I might have entitled mine Supercharging the Soul, because I actually think artificial intelligence can help us to supercharge those kinds of self-organized learning. I would call them ecologies. So that's very much what I want to talk to you about today. I have to say, I'm very excited about artificial intelligence. I think there's a huge amount that it can do for educators. And I say that as somebody who was an educator before she studied artificial intelligence. So I came to the study of artificial intelligence many years ago with a kind of educator mindset. But what is artificial intelligence? You read about it all the time now in the papers, there's movies, but it's not just something from Hollywood. But what it is, in its simplest form, it's technology that's capable of behaving and acting in ways that we would consider to be intelligence if those actions and behaviors were being done by humans. That's the very straightforward, simple definition. We could get very overcomplicated about it, but let's just go with that for the moment. And I think articles like this April in New Scientist, and there have been more recent ones that have looked at artificial intelligence performing in science exams. But I stick with this one because I think this is a really interesting headline, which I don't think should be a headline at all, by the way, but nevertheless, it was in the New Scientist. AI achieves its best ever mark on a set of English exam questions. Now, why is that significant? I think it's significant because it tells us a lot that's very much in line with what Siddhartha was saying. We've created an exam system that's just the kind of thing that AI loves. It's the perfect thing for AI. Maybe we need to rethink a bit, because perhaps we don't need to have our human learners doing the same as our artificially intelligent learners. But really, I think it's interesting here because it's an English exam. And many of the previous studies and much of the early thinking around artificial intelligence was that it was good at kind of STEM subjects, it was good at science, technology. So the fact that this was an English exam, I thought was worthy of note. But it does kind of sing to the three things I want to talk to you about today. And that is very much, yes, we can use AI to support teaching and learning, and I'm going to say a bit about that. We need people to understand more about artificial intelligence so that actually this isn't news to them, because if you understand enough about artificial intelligence, you would understand why passing an exam is probably quite a straightforward thing for some artificial intelligence. And the third thing, which is very much in line with what Sugata was talking about, is to do with how the fact that we've developed these amazing systems, and they are amazing. They're not as amazing as this thing in here. Well, maybe not mine, but yours. But the human mind is far more amazing than the artificial intelligence that we have in our computers. But we have brought about immense change in the world, and one of the levers of that change is artificial intelligence. Thank you. And
can you be a little closer to the mic?
I'm trying. Is that better? I'm not very good at standing still, that's the problem. But I will do my best. Just wave at me again if it goes wrong, and I'll move and try and get back to the mics. Basically, what I'm saying is we need to rethink education because the world's changing, and in one way it's changing is due to AI. So they're the kind of three main things, which I'll come back to in a minute. But what I wanted to really start with when we think about artificial intelligence and why it's different now to when I studied artificial intelligence, which was just before this happened in 1997. And the really fundamental different thing about our AI systems is that when Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov at chess, and it was an amazing moment in AI. I was doing my PhD at the time, and I remember people were very gung-ho. Denise, I'm looking at you, you remember too. You know, and it's like, yeah, we've got AI, it can beat the world champion at chess. We've really cracked artificial intelligence because intelligent people play chess. Therefore, we must have built intelligent machines. Well, then we realized vision was so much harder than chess. We took it for granted. And I think that's a recurring theme in what I'm going to say, is that there's a lot about our human intelligence that we take for granted that will be far harder for us to automate than much of what we've done to date. So yes, we should celebrate what we've achieved, but we should also recognise the incredible complexity of our own intelligence. But anyway, going back to Deep Blue and Garry Kasparov, this was an immense achievement. And this was AI that didn't learn. So in 1997, we had smart systems, but they didn't learn. 2016, AlphaGo, Lee Sedol, and I love that picture of Lee Sedol in the top right-hand corner as I look at it, and as you look at it, the moment when he realizes that he's going to be beaten by an AI system. And what's different about AlphaGo and the systems that have been developed by companies like DeepMind subsequently and many other systems is that they learn. And that's the thing that's made the huge difference. Before, we had AI systems that you had to program, and you had to program all of the information. So, for example, if I was building a system to diagnose a particular illness, and then we learnt something new about that illness, my system would be out of date unless I went back into the program code and recoded it. Now, we have systems that learn, and they can self-improve. And that's a fundamental difference. We know learning's the holy grail. As educators, we know learning is the holy grail of what we want our students to do. We now have artificial intelligence systems that can learn. And that does make a big difference, and it's something that we need to recognise. But they learn in a very particular way, and they learn very particular sorts of things. And when all's said and done, even the smartest AI system that companies like DeepMind build are still pattern matching. When you get down to the core, it's still pattern matching. So we need to respect the AI systems we build, but we also need to respect our own intelligence and to recognise the limitations of the AI systems that we've built. And really the reason that we are where we are now with artificial intelligence is because we have this perfect storm. We've built these very smart AI systems that can learn, algorithms that can learn from masses of data. And hey, guess what? We have masses of data. Every day we have more data. And we now have computing power and memory that I could only dream of when I was an undergraduate first studying artificial intelligence. You know, the things that we used to have to run overnight on a computer, it's child's play for my phone. It's so different now. And it's those three things coming together that mean that we do have amazing systems that are changing the world. And as educators, we must recognise that. AI is not going away. AI is impacting on education, and it will impact on education even more. So for me, the question is, how do we help educators, learners, parents, educational leaders, policymakers understand enough about AI to put in place the right kinds of policies, to think about how we should use AI and how we need to change because of AI. And one of the fundamental things that we need to respect, recognise and understand is that when we talk about the power of data, so we have these systems. So a system like AlphaGo learns about its game playing from millions and millions and millions of examples over and over again. And those examples are the data. So if I'm building a system to diagnose a particular illness, as I was saying earlier, that system will learn from millions and millions of cases and gradually understand how to conduct that diagnosis of that disease. But data, like oil, as we've heard expressions from magazines like The Economist and the Financial Times, that data is the new oil. And hey, yeah, data is making a few people in this world shed loads of money. There's no doubt about that, just like oil. But just like oil, data is crude. And until it's refined, it's worthless. And it's in that refinement process that we get the value. And from educational perspective, it's the way we refine that data. If it's data about a learner.
Sorry, I'm good.
You're right.
I'm good.
I've never had that before.
You floored me.
I'm sorry.
What you said floored me.
So we need to make sure that when we're refining the data, that we do it in a way that is informed by what we understand about teaching and learning. And we also need to recognise that, you know, the sorts of data, we talk about this data, the number of companies who come to me, as my colleague who introduced me said, I run an incubator for startups and SMEs, and the number of companies who come to me and say, we've got loads of data, Rose, we're going to do AI, we've got loads of data. And you go, really? Okay, show me the data. Yeah, they probably have, but it's really messy and it's not very useful and it's not actually complete and it's not as simple as it sounds. So there's a lot of work that has to be done with the data before you can use it in an AI system. And again, we need educators to be involved at that stage in the process. Educators understand about teaching and learning. Most people building AI systems do not. So much of what I'm trying to do at the moment is to get educators in the conversation because they matter a lot. But simply to summarise what I've said so far, artificial intelligence is intelligent in a particular sort of way. Humans are intelligent in way more ways. They're not the same thing, but if we get it right and we use one to complement the other, then we will become smarter as a result. So 3 routes, as I said earlier. We can think about how we can use artificial intelligence to support teaching and learning. We must also think about how we educate people about artificial intelligence so that they understand it, and in particular so that they understand it in a way that enables them to use it to their benefit, to their students' benefit, to their friends, peers, families' benefit without harm. And thirdly, we need to think about how we need to change our education systems because we have this thing called AI. And I'm going to go through those 3 things today. But they're not mutually exclusive, they're interconnected. Because if, as an educator, I understand how to use AI in my teaching and learning, I will start to understand more about AI. If I understand more about AI, I will understand how to use it effectively to a greater extent. And I'll also understand more about why we need to change education because of the things that we can do with AI. So not mutually exclusive. To start off, with the first one, what's the reality? What's here now? If you wanted to go off, right, I'm going to go and get some AI, I'm going to use it in my teaching. What's out there? What could you have? Well, there's lots of things going on in this space, from introducing AI into primary schools through robots to using AI to answer questions that university students frequently answer and that their academic tutors end up repeating themselves on numerous occasions. So we have some AI bots that can usefully do that. But hey, let's get away from the headlines and look at some products. So a company in the States called Alelo, which was launched by an academic 2006, 2007, has built some very, very good quality artificial intelligence systems that are mainly based on using avatars. They started off in language learning, actually much of it financed by the American military to help soldiers understand how to interact with the population in Afghanistan, not just in terms of understanding the words that would be spoken, but understanding the culture, understanding the body language. So behind all of these language learning systems is a cultural modelling system built up through AI data. Very nice systems if you want to learn a language, but hey, they also do other things as well, such as helping people to understand workplace skills. These are things out there, you can go and buy them. Also in the US, Carnegie Learning, another university spin-off that has some very well-evaluated systems that can help tutor students in well-defined subjects such as science, maths, and also some language learning. Then in the UK, we have a company called Century Learning, and they're one of a number of growing companies in the UK that have built a machine learning-based platform that individualizes instruction for students in school and college according to a particular curriculum. So that's the power of that, of what a lot of AI can do, is to individualize instruction to meet the needs of a student on a one-to-one basis. And we know that these kinds of systems are as effective as a human tutor, but that human tutor working with a whole class, the AI is working one-to-one. We have not built an AI system that is as good as a human working one-to-one with an individual student, but how many students get that? So AI is very, very useful for that kind of instruction. But as educators, you all know instruction is not all you do. It's just a small part of what teachers do, but useful. Oops. Then there are a set of systems that are not so much about individualizing instruction in a particular subject area for a particular student. They're about recommending resources, and they might be recommending resources to an individual student, or they might be about recommending resources to a teacher for use with their students. But again, they use some AI algorithms to filter millions and millions of resources and pick ones that are likely to be suitable for your students or that are likely to be suitable for you as a learner. Another use of AI. There are some lovely systems out there that I think are very innovative. So this one is another language learning platform, and what I like about this one is it's a nice blend of using AI and human capacity, because it's using refugee language coaches to help people learn the target language they want to learn, in combination with AI to produce individualized practice exercises for that student. So it's a really nice blend and an interesting way of looking at tailoring language learning and using human resource in the expert refugee language tutors and artificial intelligence and digital resources. Another one, again in language learning, because there's quite a lot of work in language learning, it's quite interesting, and this one's focusing on speaking and pronunciation. So again, using AI, natural language processing is a form of artificial intelligence. It what powers systems like Alexa and Google Home and Siri. And it's a good tool for testing people's pronunciation. And just in case you thought it was all about adults, here's another one, Oya Labs. This is to help parents understand more about the way that their child is developing, particularly in their language skills. So we have this little cloud-shaped tool that sits in the room and monitors the conversations, the noises the child makes, and feeds back to parents to give them guidance. Now, some people may have some thoughts about whether they would like that to be there or not. The point is, it's there, and it is a use of AI. I'll come on to the ethics bit later. But this is a company that exists and is working in that space, and very successfully so. And finally, It's not just all about learning a particular subject or about language development necessarily, though they're useful. We can also look at things like general cognitive fitness. This is a company called My Cognition, who was founded by someone who spent decades developing antidepressants in a pharmaceutical company and thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could do something to prevent people needing those antidepressants? So worked with the NHS to develop an app and a monitoring system to help develop what they call cognitive fitness, which is basically executive function, memory, speed of processing. And then thought, well, maybe this would be useful in education too. And so this is an assessment and then a game. I bought it for my family last Christmas because I think it's really nice and I use it myself, and it's very good to help you develop your cognitive fitness, so to speak, which can and has been shown by their randomized control trials in the health sector to reduce things like anxiety, and currently being trialled to look at things like dementia. So interesting range of products there. But actually, what's way more interesting is the potential. And I think the potential is all about this business of data. The picture of that gentleman there is the founder of Alelo, the first company they talked about, the company that built the language learning systems originally for use by the military in the US military in Afghanistan. And he is one of the people who stresses the power of data and how it's been a game changer for them in their business. And so going back to this notion of data, what we really need to think about as educators is the construction of an intelligence infrastructure that can underpin all of the learning interactions that any of us have. And that infrastructure is built from the data that we can collect as people interact in the world, analysed using well-designed AI algorithms that are informed by what we know about how people learn and how teaching works effectively. So if you think about data, we can collect data on so many different occasions. It's so much more than just when I'm interacting with my phone or my laptop. Whether we like it or not, we are being observed much of the time, and there is a lot of observational data. If we are operating with students on campuses, we often know what they eat, we often know when they've taken something from the library or downloaded a resource. We have a lot of information available to us. There's the information that students and tutors give us in conversation. We have access to lots and lots of data. And increasingly, it's multimodal data. It's not just data that's about typing something in or speaking. It's about where we're looking, the facial expression. Now, again, I'll come to the ethics of this in a minute. But the point is, this data exists. And if we were to use it ethically and sensibly, it could help us build the kind of intelligence infrastructure that could power every learning interaction. If you think of the way the internet powers what we do, and then you think of it as an intelligence infrastructure that's all about helping us to understand ourselves as learners, or about helping us to understand our students as learners, then we can really start to be the best teacher we could ever be, or the best learner we could ever be. And so back to this idea of what the data is. What we need is the data. We need it to be cleaned and processed in a way that extracts value. And when I say value, I mean value about the process of learning. That's the brilliant thing that I find exciting as an educator. My first teaching job was adults with special needs in a further education college in a deprived part of the UK. I had never taught adults with special educational needs. It was a huge challenge. I probably wasn't very good at it. I did my best. But I remember their needs were so diverse. And I can remember thinking, oh, if only I knew what had happened to you before you walked in the door, because I know you've got really complicated life. And if I knew that, and I knew a bit more about exactly what it was, where you're getting stuck in the process of what we're trying to do, I could help you more. Well, we can do that now. We can do that now if we get it right in the way we build this intelligence infrastructure. And it's an intelligence infrastructure that can power all the interactions we have. People tend to talk at the moment about AI as a technology. Oh, it's Siri on my phone. It's natural language processing. It's self-driving cars. It's going to replace me as a teacher. We think about it as individual technologies. But actually the real power is the data and the infrastructure that we can build that could power all of those technologies. So don't think about augmented reality, virtual reality, or AI. Think about intelligent augmented reality, intelligent virtual reality, intelligent interactions on our phone, but most powerfully of all, intelligence infrastructure that informs the interactions that we have as humans. As an educator, I know more about this student now than I've ever known before, and therefore, in the 5 minutes I can spend with them, I can really be effective. As a learner, when I'm learning on my own, I can now understand a lot more about myself that can help me learn more effectively. That's the real power of this, and it's not just for the able-bodied. You know, intelligent exoskeletons, absolutely, yes, we can. Glasses to help people with certain sorts of blindness see, absolutely. Imagine them with intelligence as well. Amazing. There's so much we can do. So we need to think in terms of the future, and we need to think about it now, because more than anything, we need to think about how we help people understand enough about AI to see what those implications mean. So something I care about passionately, and I haven't got time to go into all of this today, is this business of helping people to understand about AI so that they're not scared about it, but they are judiciously careful. We need everybody in the world to understand something enough about AI to benefit from it. And I don't mean they need to code. Absolutely, I don't mean they need to code. In some ways, much as I love coding, it's the easy bit. It's understanding what you want the code to achieve that's the difficult bit. And that's the bit that means that you need to understand something about what AI can and can't achieve. So that's the important bit. And then, of course, we need some people to understand how to code. We need them to understand how to build the next generation of AI systems. But that's a minority. We need everybody to understand enough about AI to keep themselves safe, and then we need a minority of people to understand so much more so that they can ensure that the kind of regulatory framework that we have in place, the guidelines, the principles, are those that will keep the majority of people safe as far as is possible. But we do have to think about what the worst can happen, because regulation will never be enough. We can't keep up. You know, never going to happen. There will always be somebody who wants to do harm, who's ahead of the game. So no matter how good our regulation is, it will never be enough. So in combination with regulation, we have to have education. We have to have people who understand enough to be sensible, to know that, yes, the regulators are doing their best, but we also need to look after ourselves. You know, we can have speed limits on the road that can say cars need to drive at 20 miles an hour because we know that fatalities are so much less when somebody is hit by a car driving at 20 miles an hour than it is when it's driving at 30 miles an hour. Doesn't mean everybody's going to drive at 20 miles an hour, so we still need to look each way when we're crossing the road. That's the kind of basic analogy. But the best way I think I've found of explaining this business, and I don't want to be grim and I don't want to dwell on it about what's the worst that can happen, is to think about it in 3 stages. Basically, all computing, including AI, involves input, processing, output. So if we think about the input, it is very much the data. And that data can be things we say, it can be things we input, it can be our faces being recognised, the emotions in our faces being recognised. So we need to ask questions about that data. Who said it could be collected? Is it being stored safely? Who has access to that data? Who decided that data was going to be collected and why? All of those decisions are ethically loaded, and we need good answers to all of those, particularly in education. Then what happens to that data? How is it processed? How are the algorithms designed? From an educational point of view, is the person who designed those algorithms somebody who knows anything at all about learning, about teaching, about education? At the moment, probably not. I think that's really worrying. And we certainly need to correct that by getting educators much more involved in this process. So we need to be careful about the processing. There's lots of worries about bias. Sure, if we don't use a representative data set to train our algorithms, we will have biased algorithms, such as the Amazon recruitment bot that only recruited men because it had only been trained on data from successful applications. And hey, guess what? Most of the successful applications came from men. Do you kind of think, where's the common sense and the human intelligence in all of this? It worries me a bit. And then there's the output. And this is where it gets even more complicated, I think. So I was very taken by an article in the MIT Tech Review that I picked up in an airport a couple of months ago, and it dropped open to the page that said, Donald Trump speaks Mandarin. Really? Didn't have him down for a language learner, and certainly didn't have him down for learning Mandarin. But of course, it wasn't. It was a video of Donald Trump speaking Mandarin that was a deep fake, very clever video that looked like Donald Trump was speaking Mandarin, but of course he wasn't. And actually these things in education are really worrying. You know, what happens if we have a video of Siddhartha? But it's not Siddhartha's words. It looks like Siddhartha, and people download this video and think, I'm going to listen to Siddhartha because he's a wise guy and he's going to tell me interesting stuff, and actually it's telling somebody else's story and it's not him at all. So we do need to be careful about these things. And we also need to be careful in terms of the output that then becomes input. So the particular case I think that people get quite vexed about, quite rightly so at the moment, is if we think about somebody in a classroom watching a particular piece of curricular material, and then their facial expressions are being captured and their emotions are being interpreted in order to ensure that their reaction is appropriate to the material that they're seeing. And then we kind of get the input-output being slightly mixed, and what happens then. So I think, you know, in one slide, I can't possibly go over all of the ethical issues concerned with AI in education, but it's an area that we really need to understand lots more about, and we need to know that it's complicated, and these are not mutually exclusive. It's an interaction, input, processing, output, input, processing, output. And that's why I co-founded with Sir Anthony Seldon and Priya Lakhani, a social entrepreneur, the Institute for Ethical Artificial Intelligence in Education, because whilst there's lots of wonderful work happening across the world with data and ethics and AI and ethics, nobody was focusing specifically on education. And education's way too important for it not to be focused on specifically. So that's my kind of slightly downbeat element, but it is important. But let's get back to the more upbeat. So yeah, education is crucial. Regulation will never be enough. But let's think about this third piece, this piece that Siddhartha was also engaging with too, this business about the adequacy of our education systems for the modern world that is largely AI enhanced, AI augmented. And this is definitely the hardest of the three areas. Because as Siddhartha said earlier, the system just doesn't want to change. It's very rigid, it's very fixed, it's very hard to get system change. But we are in the fourth industrial revolution, no question about it. We're definitely part of the fourth industrial revolution, and an element of that is artificial intelligence. I was very amused a couple of years ago when I was in Australia, where there was a big media push to try and engage the general public in understanding more about AI. And I thought this was a really interesting way of going about it, so positive. You're going to have 2 hours more a week. You're going to have 2 hours more time a week because AI is going to take away those tedious tasks that take 2 hours of your time at the moment. Very nice, very precise. You're going to earn more. You're going to be more satisfied at work. You're going to have a safer workplace. Brilliant. Very, very positive, but just a bit overhyped for me. And again, lots and lots of reports coming out, like this one last year from PwC, will robots really steal our jobs? Every week there's a new one of these reports. And there's some interesting data in them, like this one. Very interesting if you're an educator, because you are the least likely of the professions to be impacted on by AI. This really means in terms of being replaced by AI, which I agree with. I don't think any educator is about to be replaced by AI, not in a sensible world anyway. Actually, though, I think educators are going to be impacted on hugely, but not in terms of being replaced. And the other one, of course, that is consistent across many of these reports is that your educational level makes you far more resilient to change. You're far less vulnerable to change if you are well educated. And there's some other demographic differences as well. But really, these reports worry me because apart from issues around education and some of the issues around the professions that are most likely to be automated, there's very little consensus. I was asked by Rob Halfon, who chairs the Education Select Committee in the UK, Rose, isn't there a meta-analysis of all of these reports that would tell me the precise detail of which jobs and which skills? It's like, no, there isn't, and it isn't what you'd want anyway. And it isn't what you want because where we are at the moment is a bit like driving in really thick fog. As humans, we're not very good at predicting what's going to happen in the future, and we are definitely in times of uncertainty. And so think of it as driving in thick fog. Really, a map's not very useful, and a map would be the equivalent of that meta-analysis. So what is useful? Well, what's useful in the thick fog is you want a car that's reliable, you need to have good tyres, good brakes, you need to know how it works, you need lights, you need a driver who's not under the influence of alcohol, who's not sleep deprived, who can hear, who can see well. We can unpack it. We can do the same for learners. And this is what I tried to do in the book Machine Learning and Human Intelligence, which is really probably misnamed because it's far less about machine learning than anything else and much more about human intelligence. But it does talk about artificial intelligence and very much about the relationship between artificial and human intelligence. But I think going back to that fog, we're in this place. We know there's an enormous amount of change happening. What is it that's the equivalent of that good car and experienced and good driver? Well, I think this is where we can break it down into different elements, and I break it down into 7 different elements, and these are not 7 separate intelligences. I can't stress that strongly enough. I think we do need academic intelligence, of course. We still need academic intelligence. But we need to get out of the silos. We need it to be much more interdisciplinary. When, Sagata was showing the pictures of what's the work situation like now, the 3 people huddled over the computer solving a problem. You bet your bottom dollar that's a problem that involves more than one discipline. They're the big problems we face. So we need interdisciplinary academic intelligence. And of course, we need social intelligence if we're going to do that collaborative problem solving effectively. And then the other 5 are what I call meta-intelligences, and that's about understanding ourselves. So we need to understand what knowledge is. It's no good just having facts that we can spiel back in an exam or in a better situation, apply in a particular context. We need to know where that knowledge comes from. We need to understand what good evidence is. We need to be able to help people understand whether they should believe something or they shouldn't believe something. We need people to understand that knowledge isn't something that's fixed, that you get given. It's something that you construct and that it's relative. And as we evolve as humans, things that we thought were definite in one period, we find are different in another. So we need a different relationship to knowledge. And I call that metaknowing. And then there are the other meta-intelligences that are about metacognitive intelligence, understanding what we know, understanding how we learn, understanding when we're distracted, maybe how we can refocus, understanding ourselves as learners, understanding our cognition. Meta-subjective intelligence, that's very much related to emotional intelligence, but it's that layer up. It's understanding how we are developing our emotional intelligence, understanding how other people are also developing their emotional intelligence and how we interact with them in that space, but also understanding the importance of our subjective experience in the world. Then there's meta-contextual intelligence, and that's about understanding our context. We all know as educators that the biggest factor in whether somebody learns or not is their context. And that context might be family background, might be demographics, it might be the other people with whom they're learning. It's all of those factors that impact on the interactions that they have. And as humans, we are incredibly good at moving across contexts, within contexts, interacting with different people, with different environments, with different resources. I've never been in this room before. I kind of get how it works. You know, I'm here, there's a screen, I've got a clicker, you're listening, hopefully not falling off the chair again. You know, we know how it works. If I suddenly did a kind of backflip off that table, sat on Denise's lap, and went up to that gentleman over there and gave him a kiss, you'd probably go, whoa, that's a bit unusual. I'd be surprised because I've never done a backflip in my life at all. But the point is, we understand how different environments and different resources work. This is incredibly difficult for AI, and yet we take it for granted. And this is a bit like my example of the chess and the vision. This is the stuff that AI is nowhere near cracking and is actually fundamentally important. Sorry, I've moved away from the microphone again. And then finally, if we get all of these elements interwoven together, we get to what I think is the holy grail, and that is accurate perceived self-efficacy, which is that core understanding of ourselves. Very precise, evidence-based understanding of what we do know, what we don't know, how well we learn, how easily we're distracted, where we are in terms of social skills, where we are in terms of our emotional development. Because that understanding of ourselves is so much beyond anything AI can achieve at the moment. And for me, in my heart, I actually think way beyond what AI will ever be able to achieve. But that's a philosophical issue that we haven't got time to go into today. But the point is, these are really important issues that we underestimate. They're extremely important for learning, and they're also things that AI can't do. So, 7 elements, interwoven, 5 of them really focus on that meta-intelligence. But this is what I love about AI. It's the beautiful finesse for me, is that in order for us to develop this intelligence, AI can help. If we go back to that intelligence infrastructure, it can help us to be smarter. Rather than being scared of AI as this thing that's going to replace us, I think we need to see it as something that actually we can leverage to make us more intelligent. I worry that it's going to make us less intelligent if we don't use it wisely, but it could be used to make us more intelligent, and that's what we need to do. And a tiny little example as I run out of time, and this is like, I've gone from this big picture of this intelligence infrastructure, and I'm now going to give you a really tiny example, but just to try and give you some grounding of the kind of thing I'm talking about. We spend a lot of time at the lab looking at collaborative problem solving, and that involves many of those meta-intelligence elements. This is the kind of setup that we study, 3 students working together, building something with their hands, but also digitally with some technology. We collect multimodal analysis. We look at their hand movements, so you can see the fiduciary markers on their hands. We do eye tracking. We do a whole load of data capture. And we get things like this. Really? It's not telling me very much. Each of those lines is a different set of data, so I kind of know what was going on, but in terms of helping me understand whether these people are this group is doing well in terms of collaborative problem solving, it's not really helping me very much. It just tells me, you know, they were looking this way or their hands were moving in this direction. What we need, as I was saying earlier, to complement the data and to help us design good algorithms is an understanding of the learning sciences. And in this instance, this is a collaborative problem solving framework that has 3 features across the top that are to do with social development and 5 problem-solving stages along, on the vertical axis that are to do with the problem-solving. And we use this to analyse video of these students to try and assess how well they are progressing with their collaborative problem-solving. And we get independent experts to come along and look at the video to do an analysis of each of the groups we work with. And then we look to the learning sciences and say, okay, so we've got our expert evaluation of what's going on here, and we've got all of this data. What do we know from the learning sciences that might help us use that data, analyse that data in a way that will tell us something significant about collaborative problem solving? So, for example, there's a body of evidence that suggests that synchronous visual direction, so looking in the same direction, looking at the thing you're working on, all group looking together, looking at the same thing, is associated with effective collaborative problem solving. Now, I'm not saying that's enough in and of itself. I'm saying that's one little ingredient. that can help us to unpack what's going on. And sure enough, when we compared the visual synchrony of our groups and indeed the synchrony of their hand movements, and we mapped that to the experts' evaluation of the groups that were more effective or less effective in terms of their collaborative problem solving, yeah, we can see. So the lines that are together are the synchronous, the individuals behaving in a synchronous way in terms of the way their hands were moving, the way they're looking. And they are the groups, if it says high CPS, that's our expert independent evaluator has evaluated that group as being effective in their collaborative problem solving. Now, this is just one tiny example. And as I say, I'm not saying that in and of itself, but we see these as signifiers. We see these as ways of analysing data to extract significant information to help us understand more about what's happening with collaborative problem solving. Importantly, to be able to help teachers to understand how they can intervene with their groups. I'm a teacher, I've got 35 students, I've got groups of 3. How on earth do I help all of them? I might have a teaching assistant, but how do I help all of them? Well, this is where we can help flag. This group really needs you now. This group, they're doing okay. And then at a later stage, you can reflect on that data with the group to analyse what it's telling you about their performance. Now, I'm going to miss my next example just because I'm running out of time and I want to leave time for some questions, but I hope you get my drift. The second example I had was of an online tutoring system, a company that we've been doing some work with, but you can ask me about it later, and it's all to do with reflective awareness and using the learning sciences to help us work out how to analyse the data from this particular online learning environment, which is human tutor teaching human student using a technology platform. You can see their faces there, but it's actually only audio and a shared whiteboard. But if anybody's interested in that work, I can certainly tell them about it. Because the last thing I wanted to say was that, what does this mean for teaching? There are some things that are sacrosanct. Literacy, numeracy, of course everybody's always going to need these things. But really, for the other subject areas, I think we need to think more carefully about how we integrate them in an interdisciplinary way and how we teach them, how we use things like debate and collaborative problem solving to help students, yes, understand the academic material, but also develop those meta-intelligences, develop those social skills. And this is where AI can help. We can use those nice AI tutoring systems to help students gain the basic understanding, numeracy, literacy, subject knowledge. And then we use our wonderful human educators to help refine that understanding, to work with the students to help them refine their understanding and develop these meta-intelligences. And we use our AI to help us analyse the data, to help us develop these intelligences. And I think if we don't do this, we do run the risk that, as was highlighted in the FT a couple of years ago, we just end up producing humans who are second-rate computers because we're expecting them to do the things that we know the computers can do really well, rather than the things that we know the humans can do really well and the computers can't do really well. This was the first picture I could find that used the word robots. It's a play by a Czech playwright called Karel Pakapec, and I use it because I think it's a great example. We've got our humans there pretending to be it's dystopian, of course, you'd expect that. You know, humans pretending to be robots. What worries me now is that we've built robots that are in our human image, and if we're not careful, we'll end up creating teachers and students who are those old robots of Karel Pakapec because we're not helping them to develop their human intelligences. So as I said at the start, we need to think of these 3 things as not mutually exclusive, but interacting, using AI to support teaching and learning, understanding more about AI, and realising how we need to change education because the world is changing, not least because of AI. And we do this most effectively through partnerships. And I haven't got time to go into the detail of this, but basically the incubator that I run is called UCL Educate, and it's all built around this golden triangle. It's all about helping the people who develop the technology to get together with the people who use the technology and the people who can help collect the evidence to demonstrate whether that technology actually does something useful when it comes to education or not. We spend a lot of time working with AI companies, for example, Busu, Chatterbox that I mentioned earlier, Oya Labs that I mentioned earlier, My Cognition that I mentioned earlier are all companies who've been through our program, as are all of these. And that golden triangle is, to me, the key to building the kinds of co-design relationships that need to happen between educators and developers, so that we end up with educators who understand about teaching and learning. We end up with developers who understand about teaching and learning, and the educators understand about teaching and learning as it is. But we help our AI developers to understand more about teaching and learning. We help our educators to understand more about AI. We, as a research community, create the glue, if you like, to help those communities talk to each other. We end up with better AI products and services. We end up with educators who understand more about AI and developers who understand more about teaching and learning. It's a win-win. And I honestly believe that's the way that we have to move forward. And that's why it's super important that educators, such as yourselves, become far more engaged in the way that we use, develop, apply, build policy for AI, because you're the most important. You and your students, of course. Far more important than the technology. So AI is smart, but we're way smarter. There are 3 ways that we can, relate to AI when it comes to education: using it to support teaching and learning, helping people understand about AI, and helping to change education in order to respect that we have built this thing called AI. And for me, partnerships are the way to achieve that. Thank you.